Hi, this is Mashnu and welcome to day 13 of the middle game training. We are looking at the position after move 28 of white in the game between Anatoly Karpov and Viktor Korchnoi, the 14th game in their match for the World Championship in 1978. So this was a match that was not only about chess, it was also about politics, since Viktor Korchnoi had left the Soviet Union, I believe in 1975 or 76. He came to Holland and later to Switzerland, and Anatoly Karpov was representing the Soviet Union. Karpov was the champion at that moment and the pride of the Soviets. Here black made the move Rook to c6, and I would like to ask you to pause the video and think about white's answer to this move. What would you do here? How do you evaluate the position? What do you think that would be the correct reaction to this? I'll continue the explanation in a moment. Okay, so black is attacking now the bishop on c5. There are different possible reactions. Of course, retreating the bishop to a3 would be a mistake, because then the pawn on c3 would hang. So what white did here is a positional sacrifice. Rook takes d5. After the game, Anatoly Karpov commented that his evaluation was that for this rook he gains a bishop and a pawn, and besides that the pawn on f3 is under attack, and soon the pawns on the queen side, the black pawns on the queen side, will be under attack as well. So this was the idea of Karpov, that he would have enough compensation for this exchange sacrifice, just like in the previous video of day 12, where we also saw this positional sacrifice. In that case the compensation was two connected pass pawns in the center. This time is the compensation is the weakness of the black position after this sacrifice. Let's see how the game continued. E takes d5, rook takes d5, and now rook c to e6. So black wants to capture this pawn on e5. It's defended, bishop to d4, and now simultaneously the pawn on b5 is attacked. So now we see these weaknesses in the black camp are the part of the compensation of this sacrifice that white did. c6 played now, rook to c5 attacking the pawn on c6, rook to f8 defends f3, and now comes an important move by white. Perhaps you would like to pause the video again and think for yourself what would be a good continuation here. How can white improve his position and continue targeting the weaknesses of black? I'll continue the game in a few moments. Okay, now here white uses the strategy of creating more weaknesses. He does this by playing the move a2 a4. Now black is more or less forced to take on a4 because if he doesn't take, then white will take on b5 and win a pawn, and if the pawn advances to b5, then we simply take on a5. So b takes a4 played, b takes a4, and now here we see even more clear how weak these black pawns start becoming. g6 played by black. Actually black is a bit tied up. I'll move back this move. If you see here, there is no really a good plan for black, because his rooks, this one is tied to the defense of the f3 pawn, and the other one is tied to the defense of the c6 pawn. So there is actually not really something that black can do but wait and see what white does. So g6 played, rook takes a5, now rook to e8, rook a7, rook on the 7th rank, preventing the black king from doing anything. Rook to f7, an important decision here, what to do, to trade rooks or not to trade rooks. White's most active piece is his rook on a7. The reason is this gives us the reason not to trade the rooks, because after trading rooks, let's say rook takes f7, king takes f7. If we now look at this position, we see that black has an active piece, the rook on e8, and white's bishop is not that active. It's defending two of his own pawns, the pawn on e5 and the one on c3. So that means that black can here try to get some active play, although still there is good compensation for white, but the difference is not that big now. If we look in comparison with the game, rook to a6 was played, so white is using his active rook to attack black's weaknesses still. Rook to c7 now, bishop to c5. Of course black cannot play here rook takes e5 because of bishop takes d6. So black plays here rook c to c8. Again, there is not much more black can do than to wait. You see white is even waiting to take here on f5, on f3, because this pawn is not going to run away. Bishop d6 played now, rook a8, rook takes c6, rook takes a4, and now black takes on f3. h5, g takes h5, g takes h5, and now c4, not only advancing a passed pawn but also blocking the attack of the pawn on h4. Rook to a2, played by Korchnoi, and Karpov answered rook to b6. This is also an important move because it makes way for the c pawn to advance, so it clears the path. King to f7. Now the black king can try to stop these passed pawns. c5, rook to a4, attacking the h4 pawn. White calculates if this is something to be worried about or not, and decides that he can simply keep advancing his own pawn. Black played here king to e6. Now let's have a short look at what happens if black takes on h4. Rook takes h4. In that case, white simply continues advancing with c7, threatening now rook to b8, and then promote this pawn after trading the rooks. If here rook to c4 to prevent this promotion, then still rook to b8 is a good move. If black advances, then rook takes rook, king takes rook, and now comes a very beautiful move. White can play here e6, and if we look now at the position of the black king, there is no square where he can move. So we have more or less a Zugzwang position. Not completely a Zugzwang, but we can say that the rook must stay on the c-file, the black rook, to prevent c8. And he would also like to stay on the 4th rank to defend h4. That's what makes this position so difficult for black. Let's say he gives a check on c3, king goes to e4, h3 trying to advance, but look at this. This bishop is always keeping an eye on h2, so there is no way for black to have any chance here to promote. Now king to d5, rook c2. Now comes an important theme in endgame that we often can see, that is in this example the move bishop to c5. This is what we call making a shield with a piece. So this bishop is a shield that blocks the attack of the rook against the c7 pawn. So in the next move we can promote on c8. Well, black has a little check here on d2, but then simply the king can go either to e4 or to c6, or it's not a problem. Well, let's go back to the game now, because this is a long variation that illustrates what would happen if black would take this pawn on h4. In the game he didn't. In the game he played king to e6, c7 followed, king to d7. So it looks as if black is managing to stop these pawns. He controls c8 with the king and the rook, and he controls also e6 with the king and the rook. And he has this other rook on a4 that can be used for the attack. But white has rook to b8 now. The threat is of course to take the rook on e8 and after retaking advance the c-pawn. So there is only one move to defend this, and that's rook to c8. Here white could have played rook takes c8, and after king takes c8 the move e6. I don't know exactly why, but Karpov waited one move first. He played king to e3. After rook takes h4, now he played e6. Of course it's totally lost, so here black resigned. The only option is to take either the bishop or the pawn. Let's say he takes the bishop, then we take simply here on c8. And now things become very difficult for black. Taking the pawn doesn't work because of this very well-known trick, giving a check first and after the king moves then promoting to queen. So let's have a short look at what happens if, here instead of king to e3, is it really necessary what he did, what Karpov did, or could he simply play e6 right now or take on c8 immediately? I think there is not much difference between those two ideas. Let's try to follow the same thing as in the game. If he now takes on d6, rook takes c8, what is the difference that the king is now on f3 and not on e3? Is there a difference? Does white need to control d4? I don't think so. I think this is just as one as the other, as in the game happened. Let's say rook to c4, rook d8 check. Where does the king go? To e7, then white promotes. If he takes on e6, same thing. If he takes here on c7, then the other pawn starts advancing and it's impossible to stop, because rook to e4 doesn't work, the king cannot come closer, so this is over. So well, perhaps Karpov was doing what Alexander Alyekhin used to do when he had a won position. He didn't finish it off immediately, but he played a little bit like a cat plays with a mouse, doing one move that doesn't win immediately but stays with a winning position. And here he does the really winning move, e6. Alright, the most important thing about this example is actually at the beginning. We'll go back to that position, is here, is after rook to c6 played by black, the exchange sacrifice. As I told you in my last video, this ideas of looking at possible exchange sacrifices and evaluating what happens then, what the compensation is one of the steps that many amateur players need to make in order to improve their game. Many of us are, let's say, have learned chess in terms of counting material, and if we win material we are happy, and if we lose material we are unhappy. But these are the, let's say, extra things that count in an evaluation. The weaknesses of the opponent, what compensation we get for a sacrifice. So looking at these options is, let's say, a second layer that is hidden for many of us. But if we learn how to look at a position and also calculate this kind of moves, then we enrich our play and we can surprise our opponents that don't count with these options. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this example, and we'll continue soon with part 14 of this series. Thanks for watching, leave your comments on YouTube, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.